Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to Unboxing the Truth. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing with me, Jimenez, how to live light and not let the darkness weigh heavy on you.
You are listening to the best and the greatest podcast in the world. Brought to you by George Carrillo and Miguel Jimenez.
If you're right next to me and we're getting mugged, George, and I feel fear and I process fear, I'm gonna put out the vibe of fear, right? And you're gonna pick up on that, like, oh shit, he's feeling fear.
But what do you mean ultimately, though?
And ultimately, I think that is the connection of life. Emotion, processed with the brain, the way that makes you feel, puts out a frequency, and people around you can pick up on that frequency. It's just like this conversation.
Exactly.
So today's episode, we're going to focus on trying to kind of live your life in a way that is more optimistic, is more geared towards appreciating rather than focusing on the negative or it happens to all of us, right? We all have those stressful days, dark days, negative energy days, whatever you want to call them, that bring us down and kind of gets in our head and we feel miserable, right? So, growing up, I had a lot of trouble with this, admittedly. I suffered, bouts of depression. I suffered anxiety for whatever reason. Now, you can imagine that as a product of immigrant peoples who migrated from Mexico to the States, basically leaving their home behind at an age of 18, 19, 20, my parents were. You can imagine how people that young and leaving families and all the change of leaving a whole country can lead to all kinds of problems in the household. Now, it doesn't help that we also grew up poor, right? So all these factors, I don't mean to drag on my fucking struggles, but all these factors pretty much are what influenced the development of anxiety and depression in myself, I think. And I didn't catch it at first because, of course, when we're young and we're just in the system, in the school system, just kind of eating the norms that we're given, right? You don't really think about the why behind life and why you're doing things, right? You just kind of do it because you're told that's right. And in that same way, my subconscious molded with anxiety and depressive thoughts. And because of that, again, I just accepted it as truth. Now, the beef with that, the issue with that is that I went 22 years before I realized, like, psychology, where I learned about the proper things and how to shift your mental, how to shift your mind state from that dark, depressing perspective to a more optimistic one. But even when I learned about it, I was like, at first I'll admit I was in shock. I was like, oh shit, like they've studied this before. And I was in shock mostly because I don't think I realized as a youth growing up that I had anxiety and depression. And that's just like another health. This is the total fucking social injustice Miggy that you guys haven't met yet. Welcome. I'm big about social justice for this very reason, that these psychological implications that I developed were literally consequence, of the discrimination against immigrants, of the discrimination against poor people, of the institutional oppression that still prevails in our system against peoples who are in these basically lower income brackets. And honestly, I say that with the purest heart. Like, I don't care if you're white or you're black or you're brown, you know what I'm saying? If you're poor, you're going to suffer more. Point blank. Now, beyond that, there is also issues of race that make it worse for people of color. But the point in me reviewing all this is that I wanted to touch that topic, which is important too. But basically why it leads to psychological privilege is what I like to coin it. Psychological privilege is growing up in a household where poverty is not even real. Where you ain't even heard of a homie who slings drugs. You probably ain't heard of someone get shot next door to you where you live. And so you don't develop the challenges in your head of struggle, man. And you don't, and I'm not knocking rich people like they don't struggle. I'm sure somewhere they got some beef, But because you're rich, you're inherently more likely to have a more positive psychology. You're more likely to be able to look at things from the glass half full, as opposed to if you're raised around this environment where you're poor and you're suffering, you can't pay bills, you're almost evicted, your mom and dad are arguing, pops is an alcoholic. Of course you're going to develop a more negative perspective, right? And so psychological privilege remains, right? people of color and people, not all people of color, but people who unfortunately grow up in these circumstances don't have that psychological privilege. And I think that hinders our ability to really excel in life and really succeed in life. Because once you see the glass half empty, you pass the age of 7, your subconscious is molded. You're going to keep seeing the glass half empty until you fucking realize, like, yo, life isn't that way. Until you realize that life is literally the thing you tell yourself over and over again, right? So you, as a kid, you didn't realize it. It sucks. But now we're older, and if you're listening to this podcast, man, boom, we learning to live light, right? That's the key right there, man. Cognizance is the first key. Is realizing that your distorted thoughts are not really how you're supposed to think about life. Is realizing that being cognizant about how these habits are not consequent of or indicative of who you are or what your capabilities are. It's just an unfortunate circumstance that maybe you grew up in. And even if you didn't have these circumstances, this is just my own case. I wanted to share a bit of my story. But if overall you see the glass half empty, these theories still apply, right? So I've read this book, fucking great book. I keep cussing, I'm sorry. Martin Seligman, I believe, is the author. This book was written in the 90s, I believe. Now, it's called Learned Optimism, okay? Now, obviously, from the title, you can tell what the book is about, right? And it very much why it ties to the topic we're discussing today. Now, Learned Optimism is something that I read, and I was like, yeah, well, you can learn optimism? Like, I don't have to live this way, right? So I started reading the book, and you literally read into the theory. The author actually gives you the research. He gives you the story, the backstory. Give me this. I gotta. Yep. Excuse me. Just had my little snack a couple hours ago. That's my bad. But yeah, back to the story, back to the book. It's like it really teaches you how to re-gear your thoughts towards optimism, right? Of course, learning optimism, right? So the two theories that Martin brings out in this book, it's a great book. I really recommend it. It's not even that long. I feel like if you're into like learning about the mind and just how to achieve a more positive outcome in life, highly recommend this book. Highly recommend it. But the two theories that he proposes to stop, being in depression or in depressive thoughts or in a negative mood and mind state, right? Is one. The first tip he gives is no mulling. So stop mulling over thoughts. Stop mulling over something that happened in the past, or if it just happened, don't let yourself mull over it. And what I mean by mull is like think about it over and over and over and over again, expecting like a solution to just come up out of nowhere just by the fact that you're thinking about it. It's life, that doesn't always happen. Solutions sometimes come later. So the first tip he suggests, and I've been practicing, and I'll admit I've been seeing some success. It's only been a couple months. Admittedly, I, again, went through my own bouts of anxiety and depression, right? So no mulling over negative thoughts. No mulling over any thought, really, that causes worry, anxiety, stress. Try your hardest to just stop thinking about those thoughts as soon as they come up, because ideally if you can do that, you don't let it recur into a habit where you're consistently thinking these negative thoughts. Also, if there's huge bumps loud in the background, I'm driving at the moment and recording. I'm in the city of the 209, Modesto, Killer Cali, where our streets are fucked up and they don't really care. But anyway, back to the fucking podcast, the podcast, I mean. That was the first tip. So don't mull over thoughts. Don't fucking constantly overthink and think over something. The second point, which is basically equally important, is how you perceive things. So, and this is key, because the way you perceive things and the way you make that a habit is going to establish how you think moving forward, how much you're overriding your subconscious program, basically, which was programmed when you were young, as I said before, perceiving things. So, point 2, and this shit works, I'm not lying. First point is, when something bad does happen to you, and you feel that stress, and you feel that darkness, and you feel that, oh, it's going to be a bad day, or, oh, this is going to drag on, what you immediately have to tell yourself is that this situation is temporary, not permanent. This situation is temporary. This situation is not personal, so it's not derived from a mistake of yours, or don't make it personal. And don't let, and here's a key one too, don't let it trickle onto the rest of your life. Okay? So I think he calls that, that's been a while, but it's a good tip. I believe it's permeance. Not 100% sure on that, don't quote me, but basically the gist is don't let that one stress trickle into the rest of your life, because if you do that, you're going to let every other aspect of your life get stressed, and all of your life is going to be stressful. And if all of your life is stressful chronically, you're going to fall into anxiety and depression. Trust me, I've been there. So, tip number 2, when bad things happen, make sure that even if you're fucking lying to yourself, I'm not lying about this. That was punny. Lie to yourself until you believe it. That's so key. Your brain is like that, yo. It'll get carried away. You can program your program however you choose, as long as you keep repeating the thought. Your brain will catch up. So, when something bad happens to you, make sure that you tell yourself it was temporary. It was not specific to you. It was not specific at all. Make it specific to that situation. Fuck that. But don't make it personal. Specific to you, that's true. Don't make it personal. But make it seem like, this was just a one-time thing. Boom, let's move forward. Also key, learn from your mistake, of course, right? So you don't make that error again. But, okay, now, that's the negative side of things. Okay, that's probably half the battle. But then it's like, you have to also teach yourself to see life in a bright way, to see the light, right? So if you haven't done that your whole life, that's going to be hard. For example, me, man, like, I don't think I ever internalized anything positive in my life. For long periods of time, I just didn't believe I was good enough. And so when something good in my life happened, because I had that mental filter of I'm not good enough, I would just say, it was just a coincidence that happened because I'm not good enough. So clearly my input didn't make the difference. And that was wrong, because that made me less capable than I could have been as a human, I feel like, right? Because these toxic thoughts. So the second most important tip for that, or for that second tip basically, or portion B of the second tip, is when something good happens to you, you make sure that trickles onto the rest of your life. That's right, the opposite of the negative, exactly. That's how easy that is to remember. You tell yourself, yeah, this happened because I'm smart. You make that thought personal. This happened because I made the effort. This happened because I'm talented. This happened because whatever that reason may be, tell yourself that. And as you tell yourself that more and more often, you'll start to believe these positive tips and vibes, and you'll start to recur these positive habits in your brain, and you'll start to believe in yourself, and you'll start to be more positive. It all starts with the brain, yo. So make sure those positive things are specific to yourself. Make them personal. Make them not temporary. So these are things that are ongoing. These are things that are basically become characteristic of you. They're infinity. They don't stop. You're always going to be smart. That if you were smart at one moment, that's not just going to go away unless somebody whacks you in the brain, right? Or something unfortunate happens and you have a degenerative disease for your brain or something. Unless that literally happens, your intelligence isn't going to shift, man. So if you believed you were smart one day, you better believe you were smart the next day. So keep telling yourself you're smart, or whatever the fuck it may be, until you believe it, man, with conviction. Now, I'm barely, admittedly, halfway through this theory. I was admittedly 2-3 months ago, man, lots of shifts in my life. I moved from the Bay to the Mo, from the Mo to LA, from LA back to the Mo. You can imagine just all the change that was taking place in my life. I was going through a dark place, man, and I started applying these methodologies, and I told myself, like, hey, shit, you could keep being sad and cry yourself to fucking sleep and not wake up in the morning on Saturdays and just sleep. You can keep doing all that. That's cool. But if you want to see some light and fight for your happiness, man, you're going to read this book and you're going to stick to these changes, man. And even if you don't believe it, it's going to work. The more you do it, the more it starts to work, man. So lie to yourself if you have to. Tell yourself what you have to. Just make sure that brain hears what it needs to hear. Cultivate your brain, man. It needs to hear the right things. I got an analogy of one of my admittedly ex-homies that was, beef happened, man. Beef happens when people are behind your back. Anyway, man, that's probably a whole other conversation I won't get into. Shouts out the homies in LA, though. Shouts out George. Shouts out Crystal real quick. But because of that situation, man, I lost a friend, but still, he left me with some wise words. So I can't knock him. I gotta recognize that he gave me some knowledge. He put me on game. There's two wolves in your head, bro. Two wolves. One's black. He's dark as hell. He's dark as night. One's white. He's bright as heaven's gates, cuz. So you have these two wolves in your head, man. And how you cultivate them is completely up to you, man. How you raise them, right? You could choose to feed only the negative one. You could choose to feed the dark wolf. And guess what will happen? The dark wolf will start to grow because you're feeding him, right? Nutrients and what he needs. And he'll get bigger. And if you're not feeding your positive wolf at the same time, he's going to shrink. He's going to lose muscle. He's not getting his nutrients, right? And over time, this big-ass wolf is just going to say, hey, dog, it's not room enough for the two of us. What you think is going to happen, man? That's an exact analogy for your psychology. Make sure you tell yourself the positive things. Disregard those negative thoughts as much as you can. This is J Minds, man. Miggy G reporting from the 209. I hope I put you on some game, put you on some knowledge. I'm sending love and positive vibes out to all my fellow humans out there. Peace and love, man. Live for the right reasons. Take it easy and have a good one. This is Unboxing the Truth with J Minds.
Thank you for listening to this episode with J Minds, the first in Unboxing the Truth. This podcast was brought to you by bensounds.com. If you're looking for royalty-free music, and I mean royalty-free music to add to your episode, if it's a podcast, video, music, or whatever the case is, you want to add some royalty-free music, go to bensound.com. They got your back, trust. Yee! Yee! Yee!